Wyoming Territory, 1877. The wind cut low across the dry basin of Buffalo Creek, dragging dust through the street as the church doors slammed open and Olivia Zeller walked out barefoot, dress torn, face streaked with tears, and not her own shame, but theirs. She had not spoken a word inside. Not when Reverend Dobbins called her a disgrace. Not when the women she had fed during the last hard winter turned their eyes away. And not when Sheriff Talbot read the charges aloud like scripture. Fornication, bearing a child out of wedlock, unfit for community. There was no child in her arms now. Just an ache in her chest that would not stop. They had taken her daughter, the baby girl, 3 months old and named Violet, had been placed with the Whitakers, a couple too eager, too polished, too righteous. They called it charity. They called it God's will. But Olivia knew what it was. Punishment. She stood in the middle of that street, under a sky that refused to weep for her, while townsfolk murmured and turned away. Her hair clung to her cheeks in damp ropes. Her knees shook, but she would not fall. Not in front of them. Then a horse broke through the silence. The rider came down from the ridge, not slowing as he passed the general store, the saloon, the jail. He rode like he belonged to the land itself, lean frame, dark coat, boots dusty from 1,000 miles. His hat shaded eyes that had seen too much, and his name was Colton Reddick. He reined in beside her with a sharp pull, the horse snorting and pawing the dirt. "Get on," Colton said, voice low but clear. Olivia blinked. The church doors behind her creaked, and she could feel the heat of all those eyes again. She looked up at him, this man she had not seen since they were 19, before he rode off to fight in the Indian Wars, before the town changed, before she was left alone. "You do not know what they've said," she whispered. "I know what you are," he said. "Get on the horse." A gasp rose from the crowd. Mrs. Whitaker clutched her husband's arm like she might faint from the scandal. Reverend Dobbins stepped forward, sputtering. "Colton Reddick, this is a God-fearing town. That woman is a—" "I heard what you called her," Colton said, never looking away from Olivia. "You forgot brave. You forgot kind. You forgot the part where she lost everything and still came back for her daughter." Olivia's breath caught. He remembered. "She is not going anywhere," the sheriff barked. But Colton reached down, wrapped an arm around Olivia's waist, and lifted her up like she weighed nothing. Her bare feet left the ground, her body tucked safe against his chest as he set her on the saddle in front of him. "I am not asking," Colton said. And then he turned the horse and rode out of town in full view of everyone who had shamed her name. They rode hard until the sun dropped behind the hills. Olivia's cheek rested against his chest, and she could feel the steady beat of his heart. It was the first sound that did not hurt since they took Violet. He did not speak until they reached a stream bordered by cottonwoods. He dismounted and helped her down gently, hands careful at her waist. She kept her eyes low until he tipped her chin up. "You all right?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I will be." He nodded like that was enough. Then he pulled a blanket from his saddlebag and laid it near the fire he built with practiced hands. "You are not staying," she said as he sat down beside her. "I am not leaving." She looked at him, then really looked. His face was harder than she remembered, jaw set with quiet anger, lines at the corners of his eyes. But the softness was still there, beneath it all. The boy who used to bring her wildflowers. The one who kissed her behind the schoolhouse when no one was watching. "You came back," she said, voice breaking. "I heard what happened," Colton said. "I was in Cheyenne. Took the South Rail north soon as I could. That was weeks ago. Had to find the right time." She swallowed hard. "They said I was unfit. They said I seduced the father. That I wanted it. You did not." "No." "Then they are liars." Her hands trembled in her lap. Colton reached out and took one, holding it between both of his. "You are not what they called you," he said. "You are a mother. And we are getting your daughter back." Her breath hitched. "You mean that? I would not have come if I didn't." The fire cracked between them, and the quiet stretched, but it was not empty. It was full of something steady, something that had waited all these years. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, barely a whisper. Colton looked over at her, eyes dark and steady. "Because I still love you," he said. "And I always will." Her tears came then, silent and hot. She leaned into him and he let her. His arms went around her like they belonged there, like they always had. They sat there under the stars, not as outcasts, not as sinners, but as two people who still believed in each other even when no one else did. Tomorrow they would ride to the Whitakers' ranch. Tomorrow they would bring Violet home. But tonight, Colton held her close, and Olivia let herself believe in something she thought she had lost forever: hope. The morning brought a pale sun and the sound of birdsong threading through the cottonwoods. Olivia sat on her heels near the stream, sleeves rolled to her elbows, scrubbing soot from the tin pot Colton had boiled coffee in. Her hands moved without hurry, steady in a way they hadn't felt in weeks. Colton crouched nearby, rewrapping the reins with worn leather thongs. He didn't speak until she set the pot down to dry. "You know the Whitakers won't hand her over just because I show up." "I'm not asking for permission," Olivia replied, rising slowly. Her voice was firmer than yesterday, even if her body ached from the ride and the hard ground. "But I won't take her by force." He nodded once, not arguing. "What's their weakness?" Olivia brushed her hands on her skirt. "Clarence Whitaker's in debt. Plays poker in the back of the Silver Spur, owes money to a man named Deacon Mays, who doesn't forget faces. Or favors." Colton's brow creased. "That the same Deacon who used to run cattle through the Bighorns?" "The very one. Clarence borrowed from him when the spring herd took sick. He's been hiding it from his wife. If word got out, he'd lose his standing with the church council." Colton finished, eyes narrowing. "You plan on blackmail?" "No," Olivia looked straight at him. "I plan on reminding him what it feels like to be afraid." Colton stood, brushing dust from his trousers. "You always were smarter than them." "That didn't matter much when the rumors started." She turned toward the fire pit, then stopped. "I need a dress. A clean one." His gaze flicked to the saddlebag. "I brought something." He pulled a bundle wrapped in cloth from beneath his coat. Didn't know if it'd fit. She unfolded it slowly. The fabric was cotton, dove gray with a faded blue hem. Modest, worn at the cuffs, but clean. Her throat tightened. "Where'd you get it?" "A widow out near KC owed me a favor. Said it belonged to her daughter." Olivia traced the stitching along the collar. "She won't mind. She told me to give it to a woman with grit in her spine and a reason to fight." Later, while Colton packed the camp, she changed behind a thicket of willows. The dress hung loose on her shoulders, but it covered the bruises the town couldn't see. When she stepped back into the clearing, Colton looked up and didn't look away. "You sure about this?" he asked. She walked to him, boots silent in the grass. "I've never been more sure of anything." They rode east, keeping off the main trails. By midday, they reached a rise that overlooked the Whitaker Ranch whitewashed house. Red barn, smoke curling from the chimney. A woman's figure moved past the window. Olivia's heart clenched. "She naps at this hour," she said, barely more than breath. "They keep her in the room by the kitchen." Colton studied the property. "We'll use the calf gate. Woods rotted through in places. I'll draw them to the barn. You go through the back. I don't want to scare Violet." "You won't. She knows your voice, doesn't she?" Olivia nodded, eyes wet. "She quiets when I hum, Red River Valley. Then hum it. They waited until the wind shifted, carrying their scent away from the dogs. Then they moved. Olivia slipped from the horse behind the tree line and ducked through the tall grass, skirt snagging on burrs. Colton rode to the barn, knocking hard on the side wall. "Clarence," he hollered, "you still cheating at cards? Or did Deacon finally come to collect?" The front door flew open. Clarence stormed out, boots half-laced, face red. "You got a death wish, Reddick?" Colton dismounted, calm. "Just returning a favor." While Clarence shouted, Olivia crept through the back kitchen door. The air inside was warm and smelled of lye soap and overcooked potatoes. She moved past the pantry, toward the closed second door. Her hand trembled on the knob. Then she heard it a soft coo, followed by a hiccuping sigh. She opened the door. Violet lay in a wooden cradle, wrapped in a yellow shawl Olivia had knit last winter. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, the world tipped. "Hi, baby," Olivia whispered, kneeling beside her. "Mama's here." Violet reached up, fingers curling. Olivia gathered her close, pressing her face to the child's hair. The ache inside her cracked wide, and then began to mend. A shout echoed outside. Clarence's voice, sharp with panic. Olivia stood, Violet cradled against her chest, and hurried back the way she came. She stepped into the yard just as Colton backed away from the barn, hands raised. "Take one more step, and I'll shoot," Clarence snarled, pistol in hand. Olivia didn't stop walking. Clarence's eyes shifted to her, then to the baby. "You'll regret this." "No," she said, voice steady. "You will." Colton moved beside her, calm as dusk. "You going to shoot a mother holding her child? In front of God and half the county?" Clarence's hand shook. Then he lowered the gun. They walked past him without another word. When they reached the horses, Olivia climbed up with Violet still in her arms. Colton swung up behind her, his arm around them both. As they rode away, the wind picked up, scattering dust and dry leaves. Olivia didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her daughter was with her. And Colton, he rode at her side like he always had, like he always would. The wind carried the bite of coming rain as Colton led the horse up the pine-lined slope outside KC. Olivia rode quiet in the saddle, Violet swaddled against her chest. The child had fallen asleep with her fingers curled in Olivia's shawl. Colton kept his eyes ahead, but he felt the shift in her weight, the way her shoulders had eased since they left the Whitakers behind. They reached a narrow plateau where an old trapper's cabin leaned into the hillside. Slats warped, shutters torn loose, but it stood, and the roof still held. Colton dismounted first, then turned to lift Olivia down, careful not to wake the child. She stepped onto the ground without speaking, her boots sinking into the softened earth. "You stayed here once?" she asked as he unlatched the door. "Winter of '74. Broke my leg in the canyon south of here. A Shoshone woman found me, brought me in. Left food and poultices outside for 3 weeks. Never said her name." Inside, the air was stale with disuse, but dry. Olivia laid Violet on the cot lined with folded blankets while Colton swept out the dust with a pine bough. The baby stirred, but did not cry. "She saved your life?" Olivia said, brushing her daughter's hair back. "She did." Olivia watched him stack kindling in the hearth, sleeves pushed up, forearms scarred and weathered. "You always said you'd die out there under open sky." He lit the fire with a flint and turned to her. "I used to think that was the only way to be free, but not anymore. I don't want to be alone when the cold comes." The light from the fire touched his face, and she saw something he hadn't said before, not just loyalty, but longing. He reached for a kettle, filled it with water from the barrel outside, and set it on the grate. You have a plan for what comes next? She asked, folding her arms. He sat on the edge of the cot, boots planted firm. I've got $200 saved. Enough to buy a parcel near the Powder River. There's a valley with grass shoulder high in summer. A stream that doesn't dry. And you'd build a place there? If I had someone to build it with. Her breath caught. She moved to sit on the bench opposite him, her knees nearly brushing his. Colton, I haven't had time to think past tomorrow. I don't even know who I am to this town anymore. He looked at her, not with pity, but with quiet resolve. You're someone who stood her ground when the whole damn place turned its back. Someone who never lied to protect herself. When I think of raising cattle, building fence line, hauling water in winter, I see you there beside me. She didn't look away. You'd give up drifting for a woman whose name they still spit in the street? For you, yes. The kettle began to hiss. Olivia rose, poured the hot water into a tin basin, and dipped a cloth to wipe Violet's face. The child blinked awake, eyes wide and calm. She didn't cry. She's never this quiet in the morning, Olivia said, glancing toward him. She knows she's safe. She doesn't know what that means yet. She will. The rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady against the roof. Olivia wrapped Violet in a dry blanket and settled her back onto the cot. The baby's eyes closed again, her breath even. Olivia turned, hands clasped before her. If we leave this territory, if we start over, will they follow? I don't care if they do. But I do. She stepped closer. I want to live somewhere my daughter won't grow up ashamed of me. Colton reached up and took her wrist gently. Then we find that place. Together. She let out a breath she hadn't known she held. Her fingers threaded into his. I never stopped loving you, she said, voice low. He stood and pulled her into his arms. Her head rested against his chest, and his hand slid to the small of her back. I knew, he said. I just didn't know if you'd ever let me say it out loud. She lifted her face to his and kissed him. Not rushed, not desperate, just steady and sure, like the long road behind them had led here all along. Outside, the rain softened to mist. Inside, the fire burned low and warm as Colton held her. His cheek pressed to her temple, her hand resting over his heart. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. The words had already been said, and the rest would be walked out day by day, step by step, wherever the trail led next. Together. The rain didn't let up for 2 days. It swept through the hills in low clouds, soaking the earth until the pine needles clung to boots and the air smelled of wet bark and ash. Inside the trapper's cabin, Olivia moved with quiet purpose, rocking Violet after feedings, pinning soaked clothes to dry near the hearth, boiling oats when supplies allowed. Colton spent the mornings outside, clearing brush from the slope below the ridge with an old hatchet he'd found beneath the porch. He didn't say what he meant to do with the space, and Olivia didn't ask. She watched him through the window sometimes, the way he moved with patience, as though he had nowhere else to be, as though the shape of their life might be carved from the hillside, one swing at a time. On the third morning, the rain broke. The sky opened wide and pale, with sun glinting off the wet grass like silver wire. Olivia stepped outside with Violet bundled in one arm and turned her face to the warmth. Colton looked up from the slope. The ground'll be soft enough to dig now. She shifted Violet higher. Dig what? He rested the hatchet against a stump and climbed the path toward her. Cellar. If we're going to stay through winter, we need a place to store root crops. I figured I'd start it today. You already decided we're staying? I figured we could decide together. But I'd rather be ahead than behind. She watched him take the child from her arms, settling Violet against his chest with practiced ease. You're sure this is where you want to build? His eyes drifted toward the ridge. There's a spring 50 yards up. elk trails to the east. No neighbors for a mile, but close enough to town if something goes bad. You've been thinking about this a while. Since before I came for you. She wiped her hands on her apron, heart heavy with something that didn't ache. Not exactly. I don't know what it means to build a life with someone. Not really. He looked down at Violet. I don't either. But I know I want to start with you. Later that day, she found him kneeling beside the dugout patch, sleeves rolled, sweat along his collar. His shirt clung to his back, and the shovel moved in slow, careful motions. She brought him a tin cup of water. You didn't tell me you could read maps, she said, handing it to him. He took a long drink. I can't read books anymore. My eyes don't hold still for the words. But I remember terrain, elevation, water lines. Spent 3 years drawing them for scouts. She knelt beside him in the grass. You never said what happened to your leg. Saber cut. Battle near Milk River. Thought the bone was split, but it wasn't. Just deep. She waited. The silence stretched. I still limp in cold weather, he said finally. But it's not what keeps me up. She didn't ask what did. That night, after Violet was asleep, they sat on the log step outside the cabin, wrapped in the same blanket. The stars were sharp above them, and the air smelled of pine smoke and damp soil. Colton leaned forward, elbows on his knees. When I was 15, I thought love was something loud, like thunder, something you shouted across a field. And now I think it's the way you look at her when she sleeps. The way you hand me a cup without asking if I need it. Olivia turned her face into the wind. When they took her, I thought I'd stop breathing. But now, every time she sighs in her sleep, it comes back. He looked at her then, fully. You're not the girl I left. You're stronger than anyone I've ever known. She met his gaze. You're not the boy who left. I'm not. He reached for her hand, calloused fingers curling around hers. I don't want to make promises I can't keep, he said. But I'll be here, every morning, every night, if you'll have me. Her breath caught. I will. They sat that way until the chill crept in, until the child stirred inside and the fire burned low. There would still be fence posts to set, and a roof to repair, and long days of dirt under fingernails. But she knew, deep in her bones, that this life, the hard one, the quiet one, was hers now. And he was too. By late summer, the cabin stood taller than it had when they'd found it, with fresh pine boards replacing the warped wall and a narrow porch built from raw-cut planks Colton had hauled from a sawmill 3 miles south. Olivia had sewn calico curtains, faded and uneven, but they softened the light that fell across the cot where Violet now crawled, determined and sturdy, her first teeth just breaking through. They lived quietly, with the rhythm of honest work. Colton hunted when the weather held, cleaned the rifles at dusk, and returned with venison or grouse, whatever the land gave. Olivia planted what she could in the tilled slope behind the cabin: turnips, beans, and carrots, and when it stormed, she read aloud from a weathered almanac someone had left behind, her finger tracing the old ink while Violet babbled at the sound of her voice. One morning, Colton stepped inside with his hat in his hand, his shirt damp from the creek. Olivia looked up from the floor where she was folding dried herbs into paper packets. You've got company down the trail, he said. One rider, coming slow. She stood, brushing her palms off on her apron. Do you know who it is? Didn't get close enough to ask. He took Violet into his arms while Olivia stepped outside, hands steady on the doorframe. The rider came into view moments later, a stout man in a brown vest and wire frame spectacles, leading a mule packed with a leather satchel and wooden crates. He dismounted carefully, one knee stiff. Begging your pardon, miss. You Mrs. Zeller. I am, she said, voice clear. Name's Samuel Hobb, Territorial Land Agent. "I've a letter from Judge Tuttle in Buffalo. Says I'm to deliver it to you by hand." He pulled a folded parchment from his jacket, sealed with red wax. Olivia broke it open slowly, her eyes dragging over the lines. After a long silence, she looked up. "It's a ruling. The court recognized the adoption as coercive. They've nullified it." Samuel nodded once. "The Whitakers didn't contest. Not after the church council changed its vote. Seems word got around about what they did." Colton stepped out beside her then. Violet balanced on his hip, her fist around his collar. Samuel adjusted his spectacles. "You've got a fine place here. I've seen worse homesteads on record. If you're intending to stay, I've the paperwork to file for claim. You'd qualify under the Homestead Act." Colton nodded. "We'll take it." Over the next hour, they signed the forms at the kitchen table, ink feathering on the paper in the warm light. Samuel accepted a cup of chicory and rode off before dusk, leaving behind a deed with their two names written side by side. That night, Olivia sat on the porch bench, her legs tucked beneath her, while Colton whittled the edge of a fence rail smooth. "I didn't expect them to reverse it," she said. "I did." She glanced at him, surprised. He shrugged. "Not because they're kind, but because you didn't ask for anything more than what was yours." She fell quiet, then leaned her shoulder against his. "I never thought I'd be allowed to keep anything." "You didn't get it by being allowed," he said. "You took it back." Violet stirred in the cradle inside, and Olivia rose to tend to her. She returned with the child in her arms, and Colton stood, brushing sawdust from his trousers. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the ridge north of here. There's a flat stretch with good wind. If we built a second room, you could have a space for sewing. Maybe even take in mending from the ranches once word spreads." Olivia looked down at the child, then back at him. "You're already planning years ahead?" "Only as far as it takes to keep you both warm, fed, and safe." She stepped closer, her hand resting at his chest. "And what about you? What keeps you?" He looked down at her, and his voice dropped low. "You do." The next morning, they began framing the new room. Violet sat in the shade, chewing on a thread spool, while Olivia held the beam steady and Colton hammered it into place. Every nail set into the wood echoed like a promise, a thing built with care, not haste. By the first frost, the house had doubled in size. They had a stone hearth, 2 rooms, and a root cellar stocked with jars of beans and dried apples. Violet took her first steps across the packed dirt floor while Colton carved her a small wooden horse. Olivia hung dried lavender over the door and stitched new curtains from muslin traded at the post. On the last Sunday before snow, Colton took Olivia's hands by the hearth and spoke in a voice made hoarse by wind and time. "I don't have a ring, but I have a name and land, and the will to be whatever you need. If you'll have me." She kissed him then, not with urgency, but with the steadiness of someone who knew where she stood. "You already are." They married in December, with the peaks behind them dusted in white and Violet toddling between their legs as they said the vows to no audience but the land and sky. She wore her mother's brooch. He wore the same coat he'd ridden into town with. They danced in the snow that night, boots crunching over frozen pine needles, laughter rising into the cold air. And when they lay down together that evening, the fire warm and the wind held at bay, it was not as people who'd been rescued, but as people who had chosen, together, to stay. The years that followed were not easy, but they were theirs. They raised calves and grew squash, taught Violet to read by lamplight, and built more fence than either cared to count. When wild dogs came through one spring, Colton stood guard with the rifle all night. When Olivia took sick one winter, he brewed willow bark tea and read aloud from the almanac until her fever broke. They grew old slowly, side by side. And when Violet left their home at 19 to marry a carpenter's son in Sheridan, She rode out with her mother's strength and her father's steady hands. Colton and Olivia sat alone again on the same porch. Older now, her hair streaked with silver, his hands rougher than they'd once been. But when she turned to him, he still looked at her like he had on that first day, like she was the only thing that made sense in a world that too often forgot how to be kind. And she looked back the same way, because in the end, the world hadn't given them much, but they had taken back what mattered, and it was enough.